Morning, friends. I don't know if any of you were paying attention, but last weekend we saw another hack. And there were actually two hacks at the end of last week, cyber attacks that affected America and Australia. One of them happened over the weekend and it affected about 40% of the shipping ports in Australia. And this comes on the heels of what, in my perspective, was a cyber attack last week that impacted roughly 40% of communications, the communication systems in Australia. Given the timeline of what happened over the weekend, I would say that we can confidently call them both cyber attacks. So the one over the weekend was very well planned. It started Friday evening after people had gotten off of work, which gave the hackers time to really get into the system and take it over. By the time it was recognized, it had gotten so severe that they literally had to pull the plug on the ports and shut them down. So there's like a 30,000 container pileup just from the weekend in Australia right now, which is great for shipping rates because the shipping rates had been crashing. Now they're not sure what the motive was behind this. From what I am hearing, it was most likely sophisticated enough to be considered a state attack. A lot of people are concerned about these cyber attacks, and especially when states start using cyber attacks to impact the security of other states. Because, I mean, it is a national security issue when 40% of your shipping goes offline. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And, you know, one of the things I always hear about from comments on the channel is, you know, we don't need to be worried about these isolated incidents. We need to be worried about an EMP or the entire system coming offline. I slightly disagree with that. I think when it comes to being prepared, when it comes to prepping, you should certainly be thinking about the most catastrophic scenario and be ready for that to happen. Because even when these things happen regionally and they impact, you know, certain areas, I mean, 40% of Australia, when their communications went down, that's a significant portion of a country, right? And it could feel like Armageddon in those type of situations for a lot of people. But I don't think that there's a strategic advantage for an enemy to wipe out entirely communications across an entire front. And if there's one thing we've learned from the war in Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza right now, typically when these things happen, they're strategic and what power they take out and what communications they take out and which energy supplies they disrupt, because they're also relying on intelligence and things from within that country. I mean, if you've been following some of the stories this weekend, we now know that the pipe stream bombing was actually most likely carried out by some Ukrainians. They're calling them rogue, but I believe that there was only one country that strategically had a strategic advantage when it came to blowing up the pipeline. Europe didn't benefit, and certainly Russia didn't, although the propaganda was that Russia had done it, because they want you to think that somebody as unstable as Putin would go that far, that extreme. But the reality is that it happened by the one group that would benefit the most, which was Ukraine. At least that's what the current reports are saying. I mean, does that change again? I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll see as the stories and facts unfold. You know, a lot of things tend to flip-flop either way. Anyway, my point is that there's a strategic disadvantage to just wiping an entire country off the face of the earth when it comes to communications, when it comes to power, when it comes to those types of things. To the enemy, they need some of those resources available to them as well, depending on where they're planning on entering, what they're planning on executing. So, and propaganda, as I mentioned in my last video, is a very powerful tool. So you need to be able to leave enough going that you can keep the propaganda going, right? So I don't think that you have to worry about somebody sending an EMP over the United States and wiping everything out. That's just not strategic on anybody's point. Now, if we went to war with Kim Jong-un, that might be strategic because he's not going to invade us, but he would try and destroy us. I mean, that could be a strategic advantage for somebody. But for a lot of other countries, I don't think you have to worry about that so much. Okay, so the cyber attack that happened, that impacted us, the US, last week, was, it happened in the ICBC, and it happened during our Treasury auction. And the US government was quick to point out that there was a ransomware attack that impacted the Treasury sales last week. And I don't know if you guys saw the Treasury sales, but they were horrible. I mean, it was one of the worst that we've seen in decades. We saw the biggest spike in Treasury yields since March 2020 when COVID broke out. But the illiquidity of the Treasury market spiked the highest that we've seen it since 2010. I mean, that is pretty severe. That's pretty serious. And the US government was very quick this time to point out that it was due to a hack. It had to have been due to a hack. And I'm sure that the hack had something to do with it. Although, you know, even after the ICBC came back online, the Treasury sales were extraordinarily weak. And the last several Treasury auctions did not go so well either. I do think that this is an inside job, though, and I think this is an inside job that should scare the pants off of every American, because when it comes to the US dollar, when it comes to these Treasury markets, I mean, they have an underlying impact on our entire financial structure. And in my perspective, they have been weakened and damaged severely from the inside. I'm going to show you guys a chart in a second here, which is one of the scariest things I've ever seen. This is the interest that we pay on US national debt. And you look at that spike, it has nearly doubled in the last several years. The thing about this, we're paying over $1 trillion just to service our debt. So when we talk about budgets, just over $1 trillion of that money is going to servicing our debt. And that's nearly doubled in the last several years. This is out of control. And why I think it should scare the pants off you is that when you look deep within the financial sectors right now, we are losing control of the value of the US dollar. And right now, that's the only thing that's keeping food on your plates. A lot of Americans don't realize this, but we have the smallest cattle herds that we've seen since the 1960s in the US. We have a major meat shortage. Now, it doesn't affect you and I that much, because when you go to the grocery store and you're buying that cheap beef, it's coming off the shelves of South America, many other countries. A lot of the lean beef comes out of Australia, which I think Australia is when it comes to humane animal treatment, I think it's a fair country to buy from. But the reality is that we're able to buy that meat because we've been raising interest rates, which has been pushing the value of the dollar up against other currencies, which is giving us purchasing power. And I'll do another video about this, but Arab countries are on the brink of a similar scenario, if not past these scenarios, circumstances that led to an Arab Spring, when food prices got extraordinary. And when you look around the world, that's what you see. You see food prices that have gotten extraordinary. Here in the US, they have risen, and they've pulled back from their highs a bit, but they have risen and they've remained high. But the only reason why food is affordable to you is because of that dollar. And if that dollar completely collapses, if nobody wants to buy our debt anymore, if our financial system starts to weaken, I have a feeling that we fall a lot harder than we climbed on that hill. And the debt is what makes that so scary, because I think that our debt I think we're going to have a government debt crisis, which is going to peel over very fast into the consumer credit markets, because they're already having a crisis. I mean, if you look at credit card spending, people are cutting back because their interest rates have gotten so high, they can't possibly spend anymore. There's no stimulus left in the current direction of the economy. There's going to be a change soon. And that change could very easily, if implemented incorrectly, collapse the dollar. And even if it doesn't, eventually the dollar is going to slide because it can't hold on with kind of these band-aids that we've been putting on there. And when that dollar slides, everything that, you know, we've been warning of as far as food and everything else, that becomes a reality for US citizens, because all of a sudden your buying power compared to these other countries just goes away. I did an interesting interview with Peter Schiff on our channel a while back. I might put some clips up on our shorts about that. But we were basically talking about this scenario where the US consumer is going to be priced out of their own goods that they create, you know, because goods tend to flow where the money is. And once that dollar breaks, it's game over for us. I mean, we really don't have much going for us. Even with cutting back on interest rates, we're at 3.4% inflation. I mean, their target, or is it 3.4 or 3.7? But their target's 2%. So we're still nearly double the target inflation rate. And 2% is actually a raised target from what our old target used to be, right? So we're still experiencing inflation, but we've kind of reached the max of what we can do to cut back on it. The reality is that coming out of COVID, we put way too much money into the system. We flooded the system with money, you know, and a lot of you correct me on this. I say we, the government flooded the system with money. And I don't know that we have, I don't know that there's a good way of getting control over that again, other than, you know, the reality is when systems do crash, right? When there is a major correction, it's always better afterwards. Sometimes I feel like kicking the can down the road, which is what we've been doing, just makes things even worse, you know? And so I'll do some videos because there are some interesting facts, you know, especially when you look at beef imports over the past year and what the expectations are for next year, when you consider the possibilities of an Arab Spring, and that could not be a good thing. Because I tell you what, those Arab countries will do anything right now to maintain control. And the Arab Spring is when food prices got extraordinarily high back in the early 2010s. There was social disruptions throughout many Arab countries. Leadership was overthrown, governments were overthrown. And right now, with the war going on, I think that that's going to be a very difficult possibility, and a real possibility that they've probably already considered. And so that makes the situation a more desperate situation to try and combat the US dollar. And it puts them even more at the mercy of other BRICS countries like Russia and China, who are also trying to combat the US dollar. And they're combating the US dollar because, you know, we're not starving, but many of their countries are, you know, so there's, you know, currency wars are just as real as anything else. And I'm curious to see how this plays out. I don't know how it's going to play out, but those are the scariest things that you can see. So even though this hack happened, getting back to the point of hacks, right? The real hack job on the US is our financial system. But the, you know, getting back to this hack situation, these are, you know, these are targeted attacks. And I'm sure that the ransomware attack on the ICBC did happen at a time when the Treasury's sale was going on purpose. I'm sure it was on purpose. And generally an enemy attacks when its enemy is at its weakest. And after you've seen the other Treasury auctions this year, the US is weak, man. The US is weak because we've got way too much debt. Nobody wants to buy our debt. It doesn't make any sense. You know, why would you buy something that is doomed to fail? You're not going to get paid back on a 30-year Treasury note. Not the way things are going. And I'm not trying to disrupt the confidence in our financial system. I'm trying to point out the fact that there are problems with it and we need to get on top of it pretty quick, right? We need to do something different than what we've been doing. And I realize that there are people out there who have been trying to do something different, but trying isn't going to work anymore. Like, now is the time when we need to act. We're getting attacked. Like, if our Treasury auctions fail, if we don't see something better the next time, I mean, we're going to be off the charts. when it comes to illiquidity. And then what happens? Well, I can paint a lot of scenarios in that perspective. But yeah, I think, you know, these attacks they're going to increase, but I think they're very targeted. I don't think, you know, that you have to worry about necessarily the entire US going offline all of a sudden. I think that they would be a lot more targeted and sophisticated than that, attacking critical infrastructure, attacking financial systems, attacking certain areas of the country, while also maintaining certain areas of the country for propaganda purposes, for infiltration, however they do it. I'm not that smart, but I do know that they do it. And I think it's going to increase because that's the type of world we live in today. You don't have to fight every battle with rockets and ammunition. You can fight a lot of those battles just by financially destroying a country, causing social confusion. That's even, that's another strategic advantage to not taking an entire system offline, right? The confusion, the propaganda. We live in a very, very different world. And I don't, if we're constantly thinking that what we're facing now is going to be the same as every conflict in the past, we're not preparing ourselves for what's actually happening, what's actually unfolding. You have to start looking at the resources we have today. I mean, my gosh, if you follow the history of technology and how fast things are going right now, and that changes the landscape of conflict, how conflict is inflicted. And hopefully it can be, conflicts can be fought with less casualties. Of course, what we've seen recently, that doesn't seem to be the case. But, hopefully, we don't get caught in the crosshairs of this thing and people are severely disrupted. I promised you guys last week I'd do a video on upcoming power outages. I got a little busy, and that's something that I take fairly seriously, especially with the winter coming up. So I'll get that out this week, hopefully, and we can discuss some of the things that you can do to protect yourself from these scenarios.